Sup Shredders, my name is Logan, aka Spiderhands, and welcome to an SB Reacts, where today we got ourselves the entirety of an album from an act named Howard Lewis titled How to Read a Room. And if we switch over to here, we got ourselves the album art here on Music Beat. Now, I should note this is not the first time that I've checked out Howard's music. We've previously listened through Tilting Towards Turmoil Volume 1 as well as Survival Mode and things. In fact, I think I actually reviewed Howard's music around the beginning of when I started doing these videos. So it's kind of nostalgic to come back to base and kind of check out more of the new material. We're going to listen through each of these tracks from start till finish, and we're going to hear what we think. Starting with Opening Night, let's go. Fantastic flourish there with the variety of instruments.
Buy a ticket to this show. I call it a dramedy. It had no end in the beginning, but the middle sweet. You can win a prize and take it with you when you leave. All you have to do is make it through acts 1 to 30. Enter through the giant doors. Don't just smell all the smoke here. This one's gonna be a doozy of a night. Put on your glasses. I don't want you to miss a thing. You can handle it all. I know your program doesn't say it, but we are through tonight. Watch over there. Look to the right. Look to the left. Isn't that something that you didn't know?
Great interaction, fourth wall there.
And swayed. You know, one time we were a model pair, and they all agreed. But this was just communication, going all astray. I hope you find what you're looking for with your next piece of ass.
Fascinating. Really strong start to proceedings here with Opening Night. So in each of these sort of post-track sections, I'm going to provide a mini song analysis of everything from lyrics and vocals all the way through to studio production. And then there'll be at the end an overall review of the album, including applicable constructive critique, and then finally my general thoughts from a listener's perspective. But first of all, what do we think this first track is about? I would say effectively it's about Howard welcoming someone to their show. And effectively, I think it's someone I've already had some sort of relationship or connection to, especially with that last line, you know, best luck with the next piece of ass. I thought it was really cool how we did things in terms of like the panning light look to the right and then look to the left at the interlude section. I thought that was great in terms of fourth wall. But it was also just the kind of depth and there was more nuance to it clearly with what they were discussing. They were talking about the third acts and everything like that. And it was just a great introduction to the album as well, especially with Opening Night. You kind of get the feeling that this is going to be some sort of very sort of like elegant display of a massive sort of event. You know, like Howard is actively sort of like saying, I don't want you to miss a thing. I want you to be present throughout this experience. So that also kind of indicates that maybe this album is one that needs to be listened to from start till finish in a sitting, which I think is clever. You know, it's reasonable, especially at 9 tracks. This isn't a super long album. I think that's completely reasonable. Howard's vocals are fantastic. Really solid vocal technique, very comfortable in the head and chest voice there. We have some really elegant harmonies as well there. I'm very comfortable both navigating our own sort of like takes as well as the rest of the quite colorful surrounding elements within the instrumental accompaniment. There's never a moment where things seem kind of like strange or inelegant. There are some interesting chromatics harmonically there in some parts where the voice kind of carries and then it kind of melds into that and it transfers neatly for that bit of tension there before we go to the next part there. I just think effectively, especially with the vibrato, legato techniques, some of the adjustments of tail there, again, the charisma with like moving from the left, right to the left, etc., and the change of expression and how kind of dramatic it is, it just makes it exciting from the first listen. And there are some kind of whispered parts as well for a bit of sort of like tension and sort of suspense there as well, which is kind of cool. There's enough variety there to keep things compelling on the mic, and the story is told well, I think. You're interested in what's going on and you're keen to hear more. Structurally, at 2 minutes 09, it's nice and short, absolutely no filler within there. The transfers between sections are clean there. You have a lot of interesting kind of percussion and brass elements there and some sort of nylon pick classical guitars there for a great sort of feel to it, going between those extensions and triads there. I like the fact that things are so busy in a lot of parts there, but they're not an all the time kind of busy thing. You can tell that the instrumentalists involved really pick their moments to establish when they're going to put certain things in. I think having the marching drums there, or the snare drum by itself with the kicks there, was a sensible move there. I don't think having a full drum kit would have necessarily helped things in this situation. It kind of adds a more sort of like theatrical sort of like perspective to it. And the kind of pacing and cadence of that kind of allows for more grandiose sort of like floor to it. I like how bombastic the brass and trumpets are. Like they're very proud of who they are there. It's like we've got this massive parade that we're having. And the nylon string guitars, when they do those finger-picked melodies there, they're cool and responding to that a lot of the time there, as well as being sort of reactionary without being overzealous towards what Howard is doing on the mic. The bass parts that we have there are fantastic as well. They're more sort of like filling in the low end of the spectrum, frequency spectrum, primarily because there's not a lot else down there. But I think especially how bright the strings and brass sections are, as well as Howard's voice being not like high the whole time. Like we've got a decent range vocally that we handle ourselves with our head and chest voice, as I said. But yeah, it navigates the root notes of the chord progressions quite well, as establishing things outside of that when it has room to do so. I've just also realized that there are some really wonderful key parts in that interlude section with the right-left part there, including a really elegant glissando there. It's just a nice transitory device there before it goes down further. And I think actually the keys aren't there the entire time either. They come in later on. It's just great to have further development instrumentally within the piece to not kind of like have the same textures the entire time. And as well as harps as well there. I might be misinterpreting the glissando as being on the harp as opposed to the keys, to be fair. I might be misinterpreting that. But regardless, just having so many elements there, kind of like creating this wonderful sort of tapestry is really cool. And the fact that we have got further complexity to those sort of like nylon string classical guitar parts as we go through with a wonderful sort of flurry of triplet and hammer-on pull-off techniques is fantastic as well. I probably sound like I'm being overly positive. It's not that, there's just a lot of really cool stuff going on. But just as a closing note, I think on the actual instrumental parts there, I just appreciate that we're having pauses and breaks there to allow there to be kind of like a moment before we go into the next bit. When the music is so full sounding, you can get used to how it sounds. And it's just nice to kind of break that up a little bit structurally, especially if you're not having, if it's like constant the entire time and not massive dynamic range within sections, if that makes sense. But it's nice to have instruments pause as well for when Howard talks and moments as well. And we raise enough range when we do have things quite busily in the background. Thematically, it's major oriented, I think, because we're trying to establish a non-sort of aggressive take on it. Like we're trying to sort of start things off in a pleasant way, like a celebration of the fact that we've gotten to this point in the first place. And the kind of spiciness of some of those sort of scale and note choices there, especially on those guitars there, with the chromatic shifts and modulation, just kind of lets you know, hey, there might be a little bit more danger later on. At the moment, things are chill. Studio recording, mixing, and mastering, really sort of like well done in terms of the presentation of the vocals, the guitars, the brass, the harps and pianos, as well as the everything else, including the Ear Candish parts and things I've missed. I get the impression immediately that there's probably multiple listens that you can have this track and pick up the little nuances there, which is just testament to the composition. Things are very well split in the stereo field. I like, again, the panning of the vocals and parts, kind of letting you know, interacting with the audience. Nowhere resonances in the frequency spectrum. Nice and loud, bit of pumping, bass compression, limiting is handled. Fantastic start to the opening night. We've got 50%. Completely different.
Have a little time to hear all about a sad tale. Would you like to sit sit and listen while I vent, and I vent well. And I have
Right,
no
back
sense
and
of
forth.
how to read a room when I'm in one. And it's unnerving for you to witness me when I'm dusted and done. And it's a shame when I start to complain and I run hot.
Great harmonies in high range as
It's
well.
all about what I have and it's also what I have not. Well, I'm at 50% of capacity. I never knew I'd handle it with such tenacity. And you seem to think you have audacity. But I know how it's been and I know how it goes. Yeah.
It's a filthy synth, dude.
In retrospect, I can't say that I just skew only on the intel. But I've been diagnosed with so much shit I don't even know how to tell. Things come at a price when you're caught in the unknown. And I always seem to take the easy road like a bird flown. And it's a pity when I don't give the utmost permission to myself. And how about when I put things high up out of reach on the closet shelves? Yeah! Well, I'm at 30% of capacity. I never knew I'd handle it with such tenacity. And you seem to think you have audacity. But I know how it's been and I know how it goes. Yeah!
The beat boots are fun.
Ho hum, I'm looking for shit to do. He's looking for shit to do. Nothing works out when I do the things that I'm supposed to do. He never gets it right, he never gets it right. Way to bend the truth to get all the things that I wanna have. Bending all the way till the walls come down. Fucked up way of doing it as I throw myself into trash. He's such a piece of trash. And now I'm 20% of capacity. I never knew you'd label it with such mendacity. And you get to witness my great tragedy. But I know how it's been, and I know how this goes.
It's just not often I hear a really filthy synthesizer in the middle of those rhythmic guitar parts, those distorted parts. It just makes it sound like a broken machine, basically, and I kind of like that. You know, it's not the first time I've heard guitar riffs like that with the distortion. It's just cool to adjust a center layer there, especially without a lack of vocals in that part. With a lack of vocals in that part, should I say? But that was 50%. Track number 2 off the album. I think that this song is about how being at a point where they are just at half-mast and effectively they're just struggling to get by, and they're just kind of getting worn down more and more so by whoever they're having to deal with or associate with in life themselves. And I think that and they're just kind of incredulous towards what other people are doing, you know, around them, the people they're interacting with. And I feel like it's potentially sort of like referring to what's going on with opening night with that person that we're discussing there. And I think that's totally fine. If there's that kind of lyrical kind of continuation through it, that's fine. That's cool. I like that within an album. Regardless though, as you go through the track, you hear them go from like 30 to 20%, and it's just kind of interesting. It's kind of cool to hear that move forward there, and not just have a line that's repeated there without excess, you know. Vocally, I do appreciate how versatile Howard's vocals are, with a completely different instrumental backup here. These sort of bass guitars and synths, etc., and these beat boop sort of like parts on the side are a completely different atmosphere and aesthetic to what we had with opening night. but we navigate our range neatly. We know to kind of allow the palm muted guitars to come in at that point where we're singing in order for it to not sort of like interrupt it or kind of take away from it. I think it was a sensible idea to have the lady vocalist come in on top and do upper harmonies there. It just provides further sort of presence octave-wise with those lines and those heavier parts there. And I think it's cool to have how it kind of sink down in those post parts there, almost like he's coming back down to earth after kind of rising up and like that. It's almost like he's speaking up and then kind of getting everything out and then trying to sort of like come back down to where he can handle things. You can feel the struggle and tension that's going on there through the vocal performance, and the kind of grit and kind of like texture to his vocals suit really neatly as well. We have some great cooler responses as well throughout, and ultimately I feel we tell the story neatly, whilst also being respectful of the other elements within it instrumentally. I mean, structurally at 3 minutes 47, it's a longer track than Opening Night, but there's no filler within it again. The transitions are seamless, there's enough sort of like bass lines and chord progressions to be sort of like find things intriguing. Even with the guitar parts, we have faster sort of like alternate picked kind of rhythm elements there with a mixture of quarters, eighths and sixteenths that is fantastic there. We have the full drum kit coming as well, where we're kind of exploring not just the cymbals, kicks and snares, but also the toms as well. You start off with this kind of scratchy sounding guitar riff there by itself, and you're like, okay, where are we going with this? And then you have bam bam on like the floor and snare toms, and then kind of pushing forward there in a way that kind of reminds me of sort of grunge from like the early 90s. The call and response that you have with those lead guitars phasing from left to right and then right to left was really neat. And I like the fact that we allowed that point of coloration there, but we also did something different with it aside from having it sort of stagnant in the center there, because it helps to differentiate it further when it's moving, but the vocals are in the same place. It's almost like the music is dancing around you in the headphones. As I mentioned, that kind of really fizzy synth that we have with some of those rhythm guitar parts there, just that kind of broken oscillator there, it's just incredible in terms of tension and heaviness there. And it's an unusual thing that I've not heard a lot of, but I honestly feel works very, very neatly. People have done it on the sides with like pads and stuff like that, or like synth strings or whatever, but it's rare that you kind of have it deliberately in the center, because often it's almost considered too busy here. But I think because of the struggle that Howard is going through, it makes sense from like an actual symbolic perspective. And that it's kind of coupled with the whimsy of some of these lead guitar parts, these chorus kind of phasey bits there that we have going backwards and forwards, and then kind of going up and down, kind of spiraling or going through chromatic kind of like sort of late modes, melodies. It's just, it lets you know that we're kind of maybe misfiring a little bit. The kind of beat boops you have going backwards and forwards there kind of let you know, hey, we're kind of trying to find a stable ground there. Maybe our senses are scouting for something, some place to be. And like you got these wow, wow, these like alarm sounds there where clearly, you know, we're letting the person know that like there is an emergency occurring. And then you have these kind of vocal parts on the side with like the trash elements. And it's just like, these are things that I'm listening back to because there's so much to absorb, but I appreciate just the color and the variety with the vocals, that kind of how those trash parts are deliberately on the sides there, but how it is back in the center for those build parts. And with like the changes in the intensity and sort of like the viciousness of those synth parts, as well as the sweetness in contrast to some of those vocal harmonies that we have in other parts of legato passages. It sounds like a massive show, to be honest, and I like that. So I think, like, again, I feel like there's stuff that I'm missing, but thematically when I hear this, it's just fantastic to listen to someone really sort of provide this much compositional diversity in a piece there. Minor leaning with some Phrygian flat seconds, as well as some sort of like deliberately dissonant chords occasionally on those guitars. Chromaticism with some of those lead elements there. But a relative sweetness to a lot of what's going on vocally there, you know, like to contrast with that. It's just, there's so many different flavors within this piece that it's quite a different experience to Opening Room. But considering the subject matter, this is some sort of heavy stuff we're kind of working through, and that tension makes total sense, so it's totally fine. I think we're even adding more fuzz and fizz to some of the guitar parts to make them sound almost brass. It's like I'm listening back to it and finding even more bits. Like there's just so much to absorb. So I suppose it's testament to the studio recording, mixing and mastering, the production side of things, that things are as sort of like effective as they are, because it's difficult really to be able to combine all those elements together within an arrangement and sort of have them be heard. All the different synth kind of vocal takes on the sides and the center, etc., the bass, the drums, the guitars, it's as well as the lead and rhythm. There's just so much going on there, but as well as all the different sort of like drum grooves, the sort of tom fills, like it's just these. There's so many ideas there to talk about. Like, it's individually compositionally fascinating, but that we can fit them all there without it just being too overwhelming is fine. Although, to be fair, I think it is also meant to be overwhelming because that would make sense with the lyrics. From like a performance perspective, I just think here we're just really capturing a really sort of effective instrumental performance there. The drums are super tight there, whether they're snare kick elements of the first part or the entire pattern there with the different grooves, and they keep tempo really neatly, and everything else is the icing on the cake. It's well done, you know. But just, yeah, the automation, the panning of some of those lead guitar lines on a final note, as well as the way that those kind of beat bops go from either side, and the dynamic range of the production as well as the competition is also very good. We have Finesse, track number 3. Great use of claps.
I always tend to step on myself when I move. My sideways glances aren't anything new. Well, I'm used to feeling this way all the time. There isn't really much I can do. See, I don't know what the fuss is really about. Yes, I know I can get a bit unhinged, and I can't figure out my left from my right, so I just crumble to the ground. Slow down, baby, don't make it a thing, too heavy on the come down. Ease up, baby, I can make it right, whatever you do. Finesse my meltdown. What has been discussed has been nonsensical, and I cannot get a wink of sleep. It haunts my dreams and breaks me into a cold sweat. It makes me chew my nails to the quick. I always seek validation and ego inflating. It is just the way that I am. Unfortunately, I don't
So colorful.
see things really changing unless we operate on my head. Slow down, baby, don't make it a thing, too heavy on the come down. Ease up, baby, I can make it right, whatever you do. Finesse my meltdown.
Finesse my meltdown.
Maybe I'm allergic to peace of mind, still nervous when I'm feeling fine. Caught in a loop, but a distorted line. Cue the laugh track now, 'cause I'm just that kind. Slow down, baby, don't make it a thing.
Well done with the harmonies
Heavy
here.
on the come down. Ease up, baby, I can make it right, whatever you do. Finesse my meltdown.
I mean, this is huge music. We fit so much into 3 minutes 30. It's crazy. I mean, like, Finesse, to me, track number 3 makes sense. You know, effectively it comes to, I'm going through some stuff and we're going to get through it. I'm going to make things right. I know things are tense and tenuous right now, but we're going to get through it together. And there's a remarkable gentleness from Howard. Especially near the end where you've got those massive harmonies going on the sides of the stereo field there, and you've got that huge amount of vocal range that's illustrated. going way up in the range to all the way down. And it sounds so thick and full and lush, and it's really effective. It's like a group of singers supporting Howard going backwards and forwards, allowing him to have speak his truth as well. The music is done well here. It's just that I feel like the storytelling and the expression behind it is also more than adequate. And it's so conversational at the same time. We effortlessly navigate these notes and provide so many interesting tales and adjustments with the melodies and stuff like that. There's so much to pay attention to and appreciate. And again, I know it seems like I'm glazing. I'm not trying to. This is genuinely very effective from like an actual like songwriting and sort of like lyric performance perspective. It shows all the different angles of what we're discussing within this track. And we've had all these different sides so far. It makes you feel confident about the rest of the album. I think structurally at 3 minutes 26, you know, again, a really comfortable, competent performance there with these wonderful kind of pad, like, oh, you know, like I can't do it justice, but we have these held notes there to kind of create chords as well as kind of like choirish kind of stuff going on in certain parts from a pad perspective. Vocally very busy, but we also flesh out this track with a wide variety of other really interesting elements there. The start of the track, you know, having a more gentle guitar line shows that we're still not afraid of having those kind of dustier elements on the guitar, but having the claps as a percussive device in lieu of the full drum kit is just another way of interpreting sort of percussion there. I mean, structurally, we go through different verses and choruses, and we have that interlude section there, and it provides a similar feeling to 50% with that changing chorus there. But ultimately, I think this one is maybe more stable in terms of the overall approach there, primarily because we're trying to sort of affect what we're discussing within the lyrics. We're not meant to be sort of be spiraling as much there. I mean, going back to the drums there, we do go back to a kind of like a sample kit potentially with an interesting mixture of sixteenths there with the kicks and snares there. We might actually be using an acoustic drum kit, I'm not sure. I do like the tone to the snare though, it's nice and bright sounding. But we do explore a lot of different rhythms within the percussion there, as well as like leaving them kind of more kind of roomy and spacious at other parts there to allow things to float and have presence outside of that. I like that we have that kind of slower driving cadence that we had to 50% on the guitar, but because of the tempo being different, it's more peaceful and relative to that. And I think the keys in this track having a bit more kind of like room to decorate the, you know, the stereo field as well as the frequency spectrum as well here due to kind of like spreading around a bit and it not being as busy is clever here. I think that we chose our position to reintroduce the keys well. And we do have more sort of elaboration on the keys and a bit more kind of like decoration later on there, a bit more finesse with the keys, but it's never too dominant in the track. The synths that we have in those chorus parts, those are fluffy and very kind of like comfortable and cozy sounding there. It's not trying to be sort of aggressive or abrasive, especially not in comparison to 50%. With some kind of resynths as well in other parts, kind of with the portamento spiraling up and down. It's just neat. There's more kind of decoration in there. I also want to give a shout out to the kind of guitar synthish kind of thing going on with some of those lead lines at the beginning of the track there. It's very, I'm not quite sure what to call the processing on the guitar there, but it's there's something really interesting going on with the way that it kind of presents itself there. And just hearing a guitar texture that I haven't heard much within the album at this point doing reviews is neat. We're trying to continue to find different sounds. And that guitar kind of continues throughout the piece there. It's a lot more subtle than other parts because of how busy they are, but I kind of like that continuity with those textures and tones, especially when the guitar in other parts there is a bit more kind of blunt with the way it kind of perks itself up as a call and response, or just kind of asserts itself with a mixture of sort of major on leaning melodies there. Da-da-da-da-da-da-dun, like a bit of kind of like sassiness with those lines. But ultimately, the bass being representative of that low in this and supporting it with a mixture of different drum grooves and different sort of percussive patterns, ultimately, it's quite compelling. It's another very kind of technically and compositionally complicated track, but it doesn't overdo itself, you know. It does come down for that middle eight kind of like interlude section there. It knows when to sort of step back a little bit. And you just have a very sort of pleasant ending to the track thematically there. Major leaning throughout the entire piece there makes more sense when you consider that we're trying to sort of like encourage the person we're with to kind of get through it with us, especially after potentially spiraling through 50%. And so I think that kind of having things less sort of chromatic and within a diatonic here allows things to be a bit more sort of easier to sort of digest and kind of vibe along with. We're trying to make things gentle there as well. Studio production wise, again, just it's really fantastic to capture all the variety of different vocal takes in the way where they have their own position there. It changes in its intensity and perception with the way that it's panned and presented in terms of the notching within the different octaves within the frequency spectrum and sort of like layering of the piece. And nothing ever feels sort of washed out or overdone. There's no awkward layering decisions there. And we do, again, have dynamic range there, in part due to taking away things from the instrumental layers, but just in general not choking things either. So ultimately, very different feel to 50% as well as opening night. Got a wide variety of sort of colors within this one. Looking forward to hearing more. We got Sword, track number 4.
Of a glacier in the middle of the sea. Fog is rolling in this land of opportunity. Stuck inside my head, storms but never calm.
Organ.
Tapes inside my mind. Lost the urge to explore. Even the trees don't sway in my life anymore. What was this all for? I'd really like to know.
Lionel Lenning, nice. Good A-B side.
Now afraid, now hesitant, unsure, extroverted and strong. Now I crawled into a hole. Do I take up all this space? Check the time, check my phone. Do I overwhelm in the void and the unknown? Somehow the fun things felt so much less fun this year. Where is my damn sword that I used to slay with?
Strings.
I wish I was never codependent and felt the need to have you rescue me. I know that you wanted to, and you knew that needed to. Even the smile does not show on my pretty face. Who's gonna bail me out? Who's here to help me through the ends of Nova?
Because I know I've been a bit more talkative through the previous few tracks, but there's just so much to absorb that I feel like I mean, granted, it should be a given, but I feel like I really have to listen to these songs to really sort of figure them out and finesse them, you know? And it's not often that I need to do that because usually things are fairly straightforward, but like, no, there's a lot of sort of like hidden little things that are hidden primarily because if you're not paying close enough attention, you just need two or three times to sort of really listen through them. But that was Sword, track number 4. I think effectively, this track is about someone who is just kind of feeling like they're wondering where their bite has gone, where their weapon is. They've kind of been kicked and bit and kind of like beaten around a bit. And they're just kind of wondering when they lost the ability to sort of be able to defend themselves. And when we talk about I wish I was never codependent, and you consider like how low the vocals go within this track, I think it's basically trying to indicate that we are potentially at a low point, or at very much. We've kind of, through being codependent on this person, we've lost the will to sort of like fight back. Maybe we've lost ourselves, and we've figured this out after getting through that breakdown that we went through in Finesse. And we've realized that we are kind of on our own outside of all this. And it's brutal. You know, you can tell that they're going through some really horrific stuff. And I just think it's really brave for Howard to put this stuff forward on an album. It's great. Really solid music, genuinely. Storytelling is raw and authentic. And vocally, again, as I mentioned, being in that low range, it's symbolic, I think, of their position there. And that's really cool. Despite what they're going through, clearly it's not cool they're going through it, but it's great in terms of like what it represents, I think. We do rise a little bit in that kind of interlude section there, and we have some really sweet sounding harmonies there. But it's both like the experience and capacity in terms of technique with those quiet vibratos there, being able to hit those notes cleanly with the wavering there that doesn't sound like it's forced, as well as just the natural resonance and glow of their voice in the low range there. It's not just post-production. Well, actually a lot of it is post-production, to be fair, in composition, but also it's just simply that they know the range where they can still get that kind of body out of their voice in their lower register. And I just appreciate that that's handled well, really well. Structurally though, this track at 4 minutes, I feel like it's well fleshed out. There's no filler within it. There's a mixture of different verses and choruses and interlude sections, as well as some instrumental components there to be able to appreciate the surrounding elements. And that's something that I like throughout this album, is that Howard isn't afraid of allowing the surrounding elements to have their time in the sun. There's this kind of wistful tone to the guitars the entirety through this track there. We have some chugged elements there with some light kind of dusty gain to them. We have some mournful guitar rhythm, kind of like pseudo rhythm, like lead elements there. But they don't, they do rise, but not too much. Like there's a hint of like the major tone after the minor leading throughout the verse sections. But I think we're really kind of wrestling with our emotions in this track. So I think the processing of those guitars, the reverb tails on them and stuff like that, they're sensible. And it's a relatively straightforward pattern they have with the bass line and chord progressions there within this track there that I think kind of makes the guitar relatively minimalist, but also say as much as it needs to. Again, you do have some interesting sort of like transitions to the guitars mid-range with some of those bar chords and the way they slide back and forwards, and I like the kind of articulations on it, don't get me wrong. But I think the kind of like country style, like kind of slide guitarish elements there illustrate the sense of sadness we're feeling. The bass and the low end being supportive of the root notes there is doing exactly what it needs to. It doesn't need to overstay its welcome. That consistent eighth note kind of chug throughout a lot of it is sensible. And the drums being relatively straightforward in that approach as well is sensible. Like we do kind of provide a steady pace to it with those eighth note phrasings. I do like both that the drums are absent in certain parts though, such as around the 1 minute 15 mark there for moments. I like the open hi-hats we have on some of the syncopated elements as well there. It's really neat just to kind of have that bit of extra kind of flourish to those hi-hats. You could have just had closed hi-hats the entire time, but it just adds further points of interest within the track and I suppose air candy. What I kind of think is interesting is like there's an unusual sound to that hi-hat there. I'm not sure what to make of it. I don't know whether that's an additional sort of like hi-hat, like an accent, or like an additional kind of sizzle that we're hitting there in another one, but I think that's kind of neat if that's the case. It's just a very kind of subtle thing. It's also the lack of moving to the right, if I'm not mistaken, in some of those chorus parts in the major sections. You could have easily sort of like transferred the track to that and like had it be sort of more sort of structurally interesting, but I think arguably the drums are kind of underlying the feeling, even though we try to sort of ascend from where we're at, that we're still kind of stuck there. So not changing them I think was a sensible move. I think the string sections that we had in those chorus parts sounded beautiful, like in the interlude part, should I say. And it was just kind of like a warm texture in amongst the guitars, bass, and drums there, which highlighted certain notes of the major chords that were present, and a sense of romanticism, as well as how we were potentially grieving as well for our codependency. The organs that we had in parts earlier were a nice kind of subtle layer that added a bit of sort of like a glow in the mid-range that was a nice sort of counterpoint to the chugs on the guitars and such like that, nice bit of color. It was also an instrument that I don't think we've had up until this point. And there are also some other bits of air candy and sort of like melodies as we go through the piece there that just further provided a sense of our feeling of loss there going between those triads. I mean, thematically, I just think the minor major, should I say, transfer backwards and forwards as we work through these different sides of the coin. It was just really solid. It's not something we've necessarily had throughout this album so far, that deliberate kind of minor into the major. I also think it was kind of neat, sort of like from an actual kind of structural bar length or section length perspective, to have that chorus kind of be a bit kind of irregular in the approach of it, as well as that kind of parallel minor that we had in the fourth chord of those hooks, just kind of letting you know we're coming down from something. And then we had further to that to kind of maintain a sense of tension and sort of like disillusionment potentially to come back down to the minor. It was just neat. It was sweet sounding in the interlude sections as well in those major parts, but it was a bittersweet experience partly because you understand that the minor is the precedent. And so ultimately, yeah, just a nice mature sort of like composition here, not be too blunt either way. Studio recording, mixing and mastering, again, just great use of sub layering with some of those sort of like organ and string elements there, as well as a great sort of adjustment of textures with those little hi-hat bits there, the guitars and the bass, etc. Understanding which parts to keep as sort of like fundamentals and which parts to kind of add as sort of like bits of extra decoration. And ultimately, just, yeah, well phrased. You know, we can do these 2-minute tracks and it'd be effective. We can do these 4-minute tracks and being effective. We got things handled. It's solid. And ultimately, the vocals are not overproduced, which is just the icing on the cake there. I love the glow of the vocals and Howard's voice in his low range. It's just, it's great presence there. It's just got, it's rich. We got No Good, track number 5.
What is this, a grim joke? I'm certainly not laughing, and I am digging for answers and spiraling out of sight.
Strings is called response, nice.
And these feelings of worthlessness, my own deprivation has no ends. Let's not forget self-destruction and judgment. Heartstrings, they're all playing flat and so off-key, so unequally measured and out of reach.
Oh, it's a great switch up.
Then there's the burden of adulting, especially when you figure in sex. Isn't that just us as humans anyway? We only get what we throw in. At least that is what I always say to the soul, kind of thing. tell you I can't move when you're not here. When I take the time to honor the relationship we have, it shows me how deep this runs through. I'm not like my family, some middle of life crisis, but I am entering life in my 40s. Does that mean?
Damn. No good. Track number 5. Some heavy stuff, man. Sincerely. I think that this track, No Good, is about someone basically looking back on the situation they've had with another, as well as their own life, especially after Sword, kind of like ruminating or sort of meditating either way on their, their issues of codependency, sort of like their sense of self. Whether they're no good or their life is no good, and they're kind of going, okay, I'm now becoming an adult. Or rather, I'm now at least in my 40s, what comes next? What does this mean? How am I going to do this? And I think that's an effective midpoint for this album, How to Read a Room. Effectively, it's you discussing the trials and tribulations you've had so far, and now it's thinking, okay, where do I go from here? I know there's probably more to it, but that's the kind of main message I got listening through this. The vocals here, especially in that really tender part around the 3.5 minute mark, are wonderful, and I like that it's kind of left in a way that's open-ended, as if we sound sincerely unsure about ourselves and what we're trying to go for with this. I think that's sensible, and it's kind of, we're being allowed an insight into their process of figuring this all out, and it's intimate in a way that seems very sincere. And we have this conversation out loud with the listener through this, and you kind of feel like they're figuring stuff out, and that even if it's not going to be like a happy ending, especially given the show, it's just they've learned from this experience regardless, or at least you're hoping that they have at least become more sort of happy with themselves, even if currently they don't feel like things are any good. Yes, vocally though, really compelling performance there. Similar comments to the previous 4 tracks across this album. We've been very consistently solid within our head and chest voice, our vocal technique, etc. I just how well we handle ourselves when it's just a guitar, and so far, and outside of everything else we've had throughout this 4-minute 5 piece there. But we maintain presence and have sort of engaging kind of like storytelling. The track itself, again, at 4 minutes 05 as well, fleshed out with a variety of different sort of like guitar, bass, drum, string elements there. The strings, again, there's a lot of call and response within this album, but they do flourish outside of that and provide this wonderful sort of tender atmosphere that I think oscillates neatly alongside a lot of what's being discussed and sort of expressed within the narrative of the piece. In fact, I think the strings are far more dominant within this track than they have been in previous ones, and they dance around and perform different sort of positional elements there, and they engage in a way where I think we are going through the motions with the vocalist. And it's just testament to the skill of the composition that we're able to have this sort of layer within a similar position in free spectrum to Howard, to have that arranged for it to grow, as well as testament to the production to allow it to be voiced in a way it is without being too choked or kind of like over pronounced. But I also think it's nice to just take away the strings for those quieter moments where we simply have the strum, steel string, acoustic. They're not just classical such as the first piece, but we have, and not electric as per the second or the others, but just another guitar sound there with some very sort of like humble sort of strummed open and maybe potentially bar chords there. You can kind of imagine Howard on their own sort of working things throughout, kind of like figuring out their next move, their next position, and with how quiet things become when it's just that steel string guitar and Howard there. There's just wonderful sort of innate dynamic range that brings things down after they've risen and flourished with the strings dancing around like that. We have the keys and occasional points there exploring the diatonics as well as the chords that are expressed there, and they're a nice sort of like an additional texture to what's going on with those like string and guitar elements there, adding a sense of it being quite gentle to the piece there. Like, we're not trying to be too hard on ourselves despite the intensity of some of the stuff that we're expressing. With the vocals and the strings effectively the focal point throughout this, as well as the guitar when it needs to sort of stand by Howard, you have the bass again being thoroughly sort of supportive in the low end there, an eighth note groove over top as well with the drums, but with some interesting sort of like on-beat and syncopated fills as well, you know, exploring the snares and the toms. And ultimately it's just very you know, like, it's a great sort of like consistent element throughout the piece there. Again, the drums aren't in there in that quieter guitar and vocal led element there and those different bits, but I think that's sensible there. It's just nice to have that dynamic range in part because of what is there and what isn't. We did have that hi-hat in the verse to sort of ride in the chorus transition I mentioned earlier that we didn't have in 50%, which I think was quite cool, or in like track 4, which is quite nice. But we did also have some cymbal shimmers as well as a nice note, which kind of acted as a faux riser. So I thought that was really neat. Ultimately, again, the drums were really well played, no issues at all with their cadence or presence. Instrumentally, very compelling. Thematically, the track is major leaning, but it's done in a way where I think it's kind and sort of generous because we're trying to be better to ourselves, ironically, despite it saying no good. I think that kind of tender nature to the piece at the midpoint is a nice sort of faux interlude. It's like a piece where things are down in intensity there, and I kind of dig it. It doesn't allow me to know what's coming next. I don't know what's happening next, but I've enjoyed the show so far. Again, a lot of the focus on this comes from listening to the vocals directly because there aren't a whole lot of kind of like additional elements kind of competing for your attention despite how busy it is because of how well it's been written. You can either enjoy the sound of it and appreciate how kind of like solemn it is at times as well as how sweet it is, or you can get the full picture and be rewarded for it with active listening. Studio recording, mixing and mastering though, I just like the kind of the way that the strings and guitars have been presented within this. I just think it's just sensible to have that kind of compositional performance dynamic range in part due to the layering decisions there. And I like that we haven't had the mix itself, master itself too choked to be able to allow itself to breathe. So ultimately, very well done. Just really capable on all fronts. This Train, track number 6. You hear the room sound there. Is that 3D mixing? That's crazy if that's the case.
Hey, did you know I was your last stop on the highway? You don't seem so sure of yourself anymore. Are you there? Are you there? Last chance to throw up on my white flag since I can't seem to find my way out of this.
Ooh, that hi-hat sass, man.
I believe in things finding their way out of things, and I believe in me knowing how far I can bend. Hey, all aboard, this train is headed for a light at the end of the tunnel of which I'll go through. Am I there? Not much a chance to turn around and sit down and map out the rest of my mission. I believe that souls find their way back to this world, and I believe that she can't find her way back to me.
I love a good sax solo.
Over the mountain top once again.
Fantastic transition to the keys.
Is something one could call home. So here we go, yes, here we go. Next station, I will let you go and watch you as you disappear into the smoke.
sensational. No, wonderful. Really cool. Really enjoyed my time with that. I mean, like, I think this track number 6, was more about discussing the fact that Howard now understands this to be sort of a journey, and they're either the train or the passenger. This is the last stop for them, and they're going to watch this other person disappear into the night, and they're kind of accepting that they need to let this person go. They've kind of maybe realized after the last track, okay, like, I'm in my 40s now. I'm going into my 40s. I need to kind of make a decision on what I'm going to do here, and this is my choice, and I need to let this person go. I think that's a wonderful decision there. There's kind of this character development. It's Bildungsroman-esque in a way. Really cool. I think that the vocal performance with the way that we kind of dance around in a more sort of excited, energetic way in those chorus parts is tremendous. I like that we kind of have that sort of flourish to it, and it's kind of a fun pattern there, and we navigate the semitonal like modulation of that kind of chord there neatly as well. I like the different ways that we explore our different ranges as well, like in the verse parts. It's dun 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 dun, and then we go into a kind of a fluffier kind of upper range there for those bridge elements there before going into the full chorus. We just kind of add that contrast with our presence there. There's a slightly different feeling and interpretation of those points as well, with the words that we're saying there. It's very deliberate in the way we're sort of communicating and having our presence in those bits. It just makes structurally the track more interesting and shows our sort of self-awareness of where we are in the piece. Like having whole notes in those bridge sections, especially with the tenderness of those keys as well. It's just really pretty sounding in that part there. And sort of having things kind of almost in a similar position really accentuates that difference between the lows and highs in this piece. I think this has been the first track as well where we've potentially had like an absolute dedicated solo section from that saxophone. And it was just great to have Howard transition off to that. Like to have that kind of be an alt lead in this piece there. It's just great use of 3.5 minutes there. I mean, to be fair, I do really like my saxophone. I think it's a great instrument, so it's fantastic to have that voice then expressed so neatly and eloquently in that part as well, especially kind of playing off the passion or romanticism that we discussed throughout a lot of this there. Ironically, the romanticism of allowing a person we love to be let go, to kind of let that person out of our life, I think is really interesting. And then like to again have that very kind of like gentle expression vocally after that saxophone solo with the kind of like lack of push that we had in that underlying saxophone part. It's just a great kind of like contrast to it. You know, this track is interesting in part because of the different combinations of elements. So structurally, the transfers are very neat. We have kind of adjustments of when the drums come in, for example. We have different alt layers there. We have verse bridges and choruses. And it's never predictable. It makes great use of the 3 minutes 30:28. Like we even have that kind of really compelling guitar line at the start there, kind of put itself forward, its leg forward with a bit of room sound to make it seem like you know that it was recorded. And it's kind of boxy, and you think, oh, that sounds kind of loud. Is this going to be the entire track? And then it just flourishes, it expands there, and you're surrounded by the music, and it's wonderful. There's this kind of like melodic harmonic minor feel to it, and that initial motif represents a kind of a vocal melody that's presented later on. So there's a great sort of connection between these different leads there. In fact, that's a guitar solo, and then we had like the voice as well as a lead, and then we had the saxophone solo. So we had like 3 main lead elements within this piece. That's fantastic. And there's kind of like synth flourishes in other parts, as well as the steel strings being a bit more sort of supported with their chord progressions and patterns in those verse sections, whilst being completely absent from the keys. We navigate between those arpeggios there and other bits of flavor. But just, yeah, even the drums are so sassy within this piece there with the hi-hat patterns. Some of those crash and sort of kick and snare parts are great. But just the kind of offbeat, kind of like those 16th and 32nds on the hi-hats are just so tight. You know, really well done. And then those kind of like quieter parts, you do have the toms introduce themselves, to be fair, like just kind of more accents. Like in the part there amongst that 152, we go dun with those crashes being rather sort of dramatic there. It's just a great way to build back into those hooks. But I think working with a triplet flow throughout this piece was just interesting in terms of the feel and groove of this passage as well. I dig that we had something a bit less kind of linear and that we were sort of switching things up rhythmically at this late stage of the album, almost like we're dancing it through the train as we go alongside it, with the keys and like the various sort of like piano patterns and drums and guitars and bass kind of like allowing things to saunter forward with an interesting groove to the bass as well. We don't just play the quarters of the eighths or the triplets there, we kind of have some occasional sixteenths there, kind of like accenting certain elements of the passages, whilst being again absent from those more sort of upper key elements. There's more of those kind of sort of like sonar or kind of like spectrum-y kind of synths as well that kind of flutter and go wow wow parts there, almost like we're continuing to search for like something alternate. And was it like an element that I think we had previously in the track, or at least like an alarm system or something like that? And just to be able to kind of put more in, to go, okay, we've had guitars, different key patterns with like various flourishes and bits of air candy, to know to put even more in there, just that how to notch it there is really cool. But it just makes for a more interesting sort of outro part to the song. You're not sure why it's occurring there, how it relates to it necessarily. It's just, it kind of makes you think, okay, is that going to be something for the next track? But just as a final note, like just before we go into the theme there, I just really dig how the saxophone and the vocals did come together around that 305 mark there, and how they were kind of riffing off each other. The music just becomes so like huge at that moment there. You just get to appreciate all the intermingling components, both separate and together, and it's just a great sort of natural crescendo to the song. Thematically, I think it's major leaning, but like there's kind of like a feeling of kind of push and grunt to the acoustic riff at the start there. Like there's a kind of intensity to it because of the kind of action of how it's played there. There's some sort of like accented notes there that kind of makes it a bit more sort of like sophisticated emotionally. At the same time though, what I dig is that we kind of have this kind of unconventional chord progression in the chorus there, that is repeated in certain parts of the other song, but like through different instruments, so it remains fresh, with a completely different shift up in that bridge section there to kind of have that last chord provide the tension to further push into that sort of more familiar section. It's like that payoff when you're back in familiar territory. Studio recording, mixing and mastering, again, just it's great to have the changes and sort of like perceived intensity between the bridge and sort of verse and chorus sections there. It was great to allow the saxophone as much room as we did in the chorus section, in the solo section, to allow its room to breathe. It was nice to have the room sound on the guitars at the start of the track as well there to kind of let you know that it was like properly recorded. And it just sounded, yeah, just another solid effort. Honestly, 6 for 6. Nice and loud, bit of pumping, but like nothing untoward, sounds commercial grade. And again, the vocals are sort of expressed well. We can dance around, we can be a bit more kind of like throaty and expressive. We handle ourselves whichever way. The Floor, track number 7.
Sometimes memories come, but they're not the ones I want. They come to me at the most inconvenient times. Memories of my family and thoughts of those who've died, greeting me once again in my dreams to say goodbye.
Oh, that cello, man.
Sometimes I can pull myself together really well, and sometimes I can't even lift my head up at all. I'm trying to make it back to what feels like something whole. Working on all parts is the least I can do. Look around and see the forest for the trees. Take it slow to where you thought you'd go. I feel the floor fall under me every time I can't breathe. When the wind carries your name, I am crushed beneath my grief. Mother, please come back to me and take my hand just like you did I do not have the strength to start over again. And sometimes
We're not one of the symbols, are we?
The things we thought we'd not get. I learned that every day as time goes by. This is how our sons can learn to realign in time. This is how we grow up doing our very best. You can do anything you put your mind to. Run full speed into an everlasting dream. I feel the floor fall under me every time I can't breathe. When the wind carries your name, I am crushed beneath my grief. Mother, please come back to me and take my hand just like you did. I do not have the strength to start over again. And those chimes keep on sounding, and I know it's you out there.
Okay, alright.
Echoes our past replay everything.
Very used to the echo when he was talking about the echoes from a production perspective.
I knew.
And there we have it. That was Howard Lewis with The Floor. Track number 7 for today. I get the impression sincerely that he's talking about his mother, who, I mean, I assume sadly we've lost. You know, like he's wanting the support of her to get through this difficult time. Just to sort of help him get through the difficulties, the trials and tribulations that we've been going. He doesn't know if he can pick himself off the floor after all these difficulties. You know, sure, he's let go of this person, but now that he's alone, he's having to sort of find his way through it. He wants someone to hold his hand and kind of help him through it. And I think that that's a beautiful thing to discuss. It's incredibly sort of like intimate and vulnerable, but I feel like, you know, it's something that you can only really relate to if you've lost a parent, you know, or like someone that you love, or that someone is that meaningful to you, you know. And I think that that's the way that Howard expresses themselves throughout this entire piece is just wonderful. You know, like, again, you can tell they're still kind of working through a sense of grief with it, but like they're sort of speaking out about it. The melodies, the harmonies, everything they were putting forward work as per the rest of the album at the stage. You know, like there are some sort of like things that I assume at this point because of the quality of it overall, but ultimately you never have a moment in this track where you're feeling like they're kind of too understated. You know, there are some really wonderful bits of sort of vibrato at some quieter parts, which are technically difficult to do. Yeah, it maintains to be quality. It's consistent quality on the microphone, for sure. And we have these lush, like, harmonies, for example, in the interlude around the 305 mark, where we explore our range fully and provide different sort of like interpretations of that. And it's such a fantastic counterpoint to a lot of the single light lines where, like, I think it's just Howard from their own perspective quietly with their guitar. I think that makes sense in terms of like the presence and position of things. They're the purpose of it, you know. It's like the wind is supporting him through it, I suppose. So yeah, no, honestly, like the vocals are well handled, the story's told well on the microphone. You clearly, I mean, this is the longest track so far at 4 minutes 30, but I feel like there's no filler within it, continuous to the rest of it. The track has a nice sort of like adjustment in that late section there to that more sort of like it's a different chord progression than what we've had previously, if I'm not mistaken. I think that's a sensible decision in part because it just helps sort of add further compositional diversity to the piece to kind of switch things up at that point, especially especially if we're discussing something slightly different. We kind of have this interesting sort of almost naked approach to the guitar, keys, and strings at the start there, where they're kind of coming one after the other and sort of kind of discuss with each other the concept of the music they're playing there. And they're interesting kind of like individual ideas there, but it's just kind of neat to not have them instantly layer themselves immediately and kind of have them as a constant there. They poke in a bit and then they kind of back off a little bit. The acoustic guitar being quite nice and busy in the low and kind of like playing a mixture of different sort of finger-picked melodies and sort of like arpeggios there, kind of expanding upon the existing sort of chord progressions like open chords and stuff that we've had prior. And it works really neatly alongside the buzz of the cello that you have in certain parts, such as the 58-second mark there. Like a wonderful kind of burn and buzz to it that is just really effective at this point, especially with the kind of folky feel to a lot of the elements within it. It doesn't interfere with any of the keys or strings or anything else within this piece, partially because of its range, but also because it's different sort of texture and timbre. I also want to sort of like comment on the percussion as well. It's a different type of arrangement, if not mistaken. We don't rely on the hi-hats and rides as we have in previous tracks. It's more sort of similar to the opening night, where we have kind of like kicks and snares there, some tambourines or shakers, and then a crash we have for occasional accents. And I think that's just sensible. You know, like we're not trying to sort of like make this track sound too bright, because at the moment we're on the floor. So it makes sense you'd have that kind of low end sort of perspective on those percussive elements there, with a mixture of interesting sort of quarters, eighths, and sixteenths. I mean, like we might be using brushes, and there might be a 16th note kind of shimmy on the shakers at some point as per other tracks there as well, like some sub 16th grooves. And we have the strings and piano come up a bit later on within this sort of track there to kind of further sort of decorate things, especially in the interlude there, as the kind of emotions pour out, I suppose, there. But they're never too overwhelming, and they're not trying to sort of like overshadow what Howard is doing on the microphone. It's more sort of an additional sort of alternate ambience to what's been presented prior. And I kind of dig how the keys kind of approach things there. They're almost kind of like proud of itself in a certain way, like we are sort of reaching out or speaking out in a sense there, when it has space to do so. The fact that we can kind of keep the track kind of like upbeat and kind of in that specific part there, I think is in part due to the chord progression, but also because of like the different combination of instruments we have, like the different sort of like types we have, as well as a major leaning on those parts there. The halftime feel for a lot of this track kind of works well within the minor orients, but clearly because it's a bit slower and more contemplative. But yeah, no, it's just interesting. No, I think that maybe going normal time would have been a bit too busy anyways. Would have been too much of a texture shift, I think. We need to keep the halftime the entire time. Yeah, fantastic dynamic range on the drums as a closing note there. I like that even though it was halftime, they weren't afraid to put in additional sort of ghost notes and stuff like that in there. And just genuinely another well-structured track there, which again, that final section sort of with the split shift in there was cool. Thematically, major leaning. No, it's minor for the first part. No, it'd be minor key leaning, I think. But then it goes major in that last part there. I'm not sure if we have any chromatics, but like it's just nice to be very sort of blunt about what kind of mood or expression we're having for the point of the track that we're at there. I think we're trying to show sort of quiet appreciation for this person and who they were in our life, even though we're sort of struggling with the fact that they're not there. Yeah, ultimately, I feel like the varying chord progressions work really neatly and flesh the song out well. Smooth transitions between parts. Recording, mixing, mastering, studio production side of things is fantastic. Again, I like how the keys, strings, and guitar at the start of the piece are allowed to kind of interact and go between each other. I like how things have been layered instrumentally, but also how they have that kind of raw texture, such as, again, the cello and stuff like that, and how things cascade over top in other parts. We've got, again, production dynamic range, and there's just some parts where, again, because of the way the vocals are presented, it's very intimate. If we'd overproduced the vocals, it would have seemed maybe a little bit disingenuous or overdone. So I just think, you know, it's just another solid effort, and everything seems quite, you know, like well connected from like a post-production as well. Sup Shredders, post-production Spiderhands here, just in the editing suite. Just needed to make a bit of an amendment before we go into track number 8, Bright Lights. So my understanding is that this is a cover of a song from Richard and Linda Thompson that is performed here by Howard within this album. The full name of the original track is I Want to See the Bright Lights Tonight. So Richard and Linda Thompson, they performed, I assume, the original, and then Howard is covering it within this album. Just bringing that up here because I don't think I mention it in the actual review and analysis section itself. So just so you know that before going into it. Cheers. We got track number 8, Bright Lights.
A I'm so tired of working every day. Now the weekend's come, I gotta throw my troubles away. If you've got the cab fare, mister, you'll do alright. I wanna see the bright lights tonight. Meet me at the station, don't be late.
Reference to the train.
I need to spend some money and it just won't wait. Take me to the dance and hold me tight. I wanna see the bright lights tonight. There's crazy people running all over town. There's a silver band just marching up and down. And the big boys, they are spoiling
Very well
for
built.
a fight. I wanna see the bright lights tonight. Meet me at the station, don't be late. I need to spend some money and it just won't wait. Take me to the dance and hold me tight. I wanna see the bright lights tonight. A couple of drunken nights rolling on the floor. It's just the kind of mess I'm looking for. I'm gonna dream till Monday comes in sight. I want to see the bright lights tonight. Meet me at the station, don't be late. I need to spend some money and it just won't wait. Take me to the dance and hold me tight. I wanna see the bright lights tonight. Take me to the dance and hold me tight. Hey, I wanna see the bright lights tonight.
Fantastic. Great work. That was awesome. Really, really good. Really, really good. So that was Bright Lights, track number 8. A song that I think was more about After the Floor, with a mention of the train as well, this train, track number 6. Effectively, it's more sort of going, okay, I know I've hit the floor, and now I want to go out and party, and I just want to try and enjoy life again. I'm going to try and make a concerted effort just to kind of, maybe drink a bit, like drink until Monday, kind of get out and sort of enjoy things. And they discuss the kind of band going around the place, and you have like the band going backwards and forwards there. And you kind of get the impression that this is like the turning point. This is like, okay, we've gotten to our low point and we do need people to kind of help pick us up, but we can do this. We can make this work with someone else's help. And this is Howard inviting, I suppose, a listener to come spend time with them to kind of get through things. And I think that's kind of neat. I think that's cool. I think that makes sense. That's a nice sort of like vibe shift at this point. Then I listen to the vocals and I just hear this kind of, I suppose, joy within the chorus sections, this kind of like curiosity and excitement without being too overbearing or too over the top. It makes me feel good because we've had this journey with Howard to the point where we kind of feel and understand the struggle that they've gone through and how low they've gone. And we want them to kind of find their way out of the mire that we're in and find a place of happiness, or at least sort of like peace. Even if it means that they kind of have to go splash out for a bit, spend some money and kind of get themselves to a point where they're kind of pissed, it's still like they're wanting to kind of get out there and do something different. And I think that's great. And you know, that's just the connection that we develop with Howard as we go through the album. And it just helps again that it's just another really sort of well carried, well sung performance there, where we listen to and we listen to Howard, and we just we understand we're in safe hands with both technique as well as the expression of things. It seems sincere and earnest. We harmonize neatly when we need to. We're on our own when we need to, for a more sort of like one-on-one approach there, without being too like kind of like in over the top. And there's just like wonderful transitions between parts structurally as well there. We just have a really kind of pleasant to listen to track with a mixture of guitars, bass, drums, brass, and organs as well there. It's kind of joyous. Again, you not only have the ear candy of the occasional reference to like the band going past and everything like that, but you just have these wonderful glissandos on the organs that kind of peter you into the chorus part. And it's just really pleasant. It's just kind of like a celebration, a charm with the glow of that, how it's kind of brightening things up, especially when the brass that has been mentioned earlier comes in and it has either its own time in the sun, or it starts sort of playing notes that resonate with some of those chord progressions within those hook lines and really sort of elevate things. There's this wonderful sort of like coloration and busyness at the start of the piece though, with a boom, 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 that kind of iteration of the motif. And you have the drums and the bass sort of introduced very quickly there, and there's absolutely no filler, especially in a 3-minute track with verses and choruses and sections and stuff like that. There's nothing. It's cut to the chase. And we have like tom fills as well as like bass lines that kind of navigate their fretboard a little bit and enjoy the range they have there. And it's nice to have these instruments being a bit more sort of explorative when they're not immediately sort of supporting Howard, to have their own sort of time in the sun. And it's almost like very pleasant in its sort of country charm there, with like the color of those guitar parts as well and how they resonate with those organs that I mentioned there. There's a major leaning throughout the entirety of the track, if I'm not mistaken there. And it's very gentle in how the keys are presented as well there. It's just, we play minimalist notes, but like the overall combination of those elements has a very sort of like tender mid-range feeling that kind of elevates whilst also being like celebrating the feeling I wanted to go outside. I mean, I could be tripping and misconstruing the keys for like the lead guitar part there, I'm not sure. But just the vibrato and the flourish and the organs and some of those sort of bridge parts there before we go back up into it, it just kind of like, it's just very, very cool. Ultimately, each of these sort of like instruments within this piece have their own time in the sun, and there's enough sort of structural diversity there to keep things compelling. Especially with the shakers at the end though, you have a more sort of straightforward piece there than previous ones which have been a bit longer. And I think that's sensible. You know, this could be more of a singly element as opposed to the previous ones. It's like a track where if you've got the context of the rest of the album, you maybe appreciate it more, but you can still enjoy it within isolation. I just think it's kind of a sensible decision to have a shorter track, which is kind of like that. I think Opening Night would be a good single as well, but like Bright Lights as well. I just think it's not too sort of, again, not too overzealous for this positivity and stuff like that. It's kind of, again, it's very mature. But it does, it gives you the best of both worlds. And there's enough interesting sort of like instrumental melodies and harmonies to sort of carry you through, as well as adjustments on the drums there with the transfers between parts, especially with the boom, 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 you know, like the kind of the stop-starty kind of element there with the consistency and other bits there. It's cool. And it's almost like, just as a closing note before we talk about the theme, you've got that big band finish with that kind of, you know, the trumpets, the brass with like the marching drums going left and right as Howard passes them by, coming to sort of join with them at the end for that big finish with the vocals rising for that final sort of crescendo before we kind of layer out. It's just dope. It's really cool. Again, it's just a great sort of isolated concept. Works well within the album and as a single. Thematically, it's major leaning, makes total sense as to why that is. It's more of a celebration of I want to go out and sort of like celebrate life and spend money and enjoy things despite all the trials and tribulations that I've gone through. It's not too like bright and vivacious and excited. It's got a steady kind of plunking pace to it, but so I think it suits the vibe of the album. It's very easy to listen to. And there might be some sort of like country scale-ish kind of like chromatics very occasionally, but yeah, it's definitely major sort of coded. I don't think we could have had it any other way. Studio recording, mixing and mastering, again, great use of the band going from left to right with the panning automation there and that front. Nice sort of niching of elements there without any sort of resonant frequencies throughout the scale and pace. Ultimately just, commercial grade again. Vocals are what presented well. We had those kind of like riffs in the late stage from the vocals done nicely as well there. And it just sounds, again, it's just commercial grade, nice and loud, bit of pumping bass compression, limiting is handled. And I've had a great time with this album, so to speak. Anxiety Dance Floor, track number 9. Very different.
Body round and round.
Ooh.
Let your thoughts melt to the ground. How about taking their advice when your head is in a vice? Oh, prance yourself into the room. No admission to the gloom. What's the cost of talking shit when you can't even measure it? Was this really what you were aiming for? Anxiety dance floor. It's not what you came for. Anxiety dance floor. You're begging for one more. Anxiety dance floor. Anxiety dance floor.
What are we gonna do here, man?
Slide into a cruising room. Adjust your looks, prepare for doom. How about offering a dance to the devil in your glands? Coveting your love of lust and slowly turning into dust. Unraveling is bringing sin. We must assess this mess we're in. Isn't this what you were yearning for? Fuck it. Anxiety dance floor. It's not what you came for. Anxiety dance floor. You're begging for one more. Anxiety dance floor. Anxiety dance
I wasn't expecting this, but I kind of dig how different it is to what I was expecting. Interesting. So if there's two genres that I really like, it's my my metal and my electronic music. And I wasn't expecting this to be done that way, but I kind of dig it, especially considering the subject matter. I mean, this is track 9, Anxiety Dance Floor. As the last track on an album, I kind of feel like this is just an interesting take on things. It's kind of like the ending of a horror film where it doesn't end the way you want it to, which is like a happy ending. It just kind of like it goes in a different direction, and it's kind of unsettling because of that. But it's not that I dislike it, it's just I don't think you are necessarily going to have a super happy ending to an album like this because of the struggle that Howard's gone through. But it's almost like after going through Bright Lights, we actually get out there and do things, and we're just kind of accepting, actually, is this what I want? Is this okay? You know, fuck it. He says fuck it in there, and it's just like, fuck it, we're just going to do it. And I have to kind of respect that. I think if I was just trying to sort of like summarize it, it's more of kind of like a stoic kind of approach to life in general. It's being kind of like accepting of just how much kind of shit we've gone through, and just kind of like going, okay, we are just out now. This is just what this is. We've done everything we can. We're now overthinking things through the amount of thinking we've had to do to sort everything else out. And then you get to a point in your life where effectively you've just got to kind of accept what your life is and just kind of go out there and live it. I think that's what this kind of comes down to, and it's a very interesting outro to it. It's very different to Bright Lights. I kind of dig that we were unapologetically doing similar things to the rest of the album vocally here, and I think that initially I was expecting for it to fall like dum 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 dum, but the fact that it doesn't want to commit to that, it kind of sticks to like this kind of halftime flow and has like very kind of few, like it has a drop, and the drop was cool, but it doesn't do that typical build drop thing that a lot of tracks do. Kind of ironically makes it stand out and is a bit more cohesive with the album, I think. It's an album where there's a lot of different flavors in it, and that's something I'll talk about in the outro section. But ultimately, I feel like my time with this song has been great, in the sense that like it's just nice to have a different sort of like ambiance to it. It's nice to sort of represent Howard going to the club and kind of doing these things, and it's his interpretation of it, and I appreciate that. There's these kind of vocal choppy elements as well alongside Howard's vocals, And again, just with the bluntness of the part, like before that drop there, it's almost like we're kind of approaching this with more of a kind of a almost deadpanish kind of part there, with the chops, those kind of like fun and melodic elements being like a counterpoint of a harmony, I suppose. To be fair, we do double track, I think, in some of those, like the 110 mark, we do double track our vocals as opposed, you know, it is per other tracks there for a bit of extra size. But I just think, to be fair, the focal point of this, I think, is honestly atmosphere, as much as how it's storytelling. Like, we have competent vocal technique there, but it's more about the ambience and the vibe that we're presenting here. It's just a nice, cool way to finish that's very different to what we've had prior. Structurally, the track has a mixture of sort of builds and quite diverse parts there, and chorus elements there, as well as a drop-in builds, a flurry of different synthetic textures that are extremely different to the vast majority of instrumental elements that we've had prior within this, and I think that's great. It kind of, again, if it was structured in a traditional EDM format, I think it would have been more alien within this album as opposed to this, where it's more sort of like catering towards not an extended mix, but like, you know, like a verse chorus sort of poppy track. I think the fact that like it takes 6 seconds for the song to come in with just occasional sort of windy, wispy sounds kind of lets you know that Howard at this point feels incredibly comfortable allowing you to have a moment just to kind of come into it. He's like aware that if you weren't okay with this, you would have basically stopped listening a while back. And so he's assuming that you're ready for the final dance, you know, after you've been invited out tonight. And maybe this is also a way of sort of letting the listener know, hey, you're a part of the dance that Howard is having here. You're like been through this entire journey with him. Here you are. So effectively, you know, like we have just a really well-rounded sort of structure to it, with kind of like, it kind of teases you a little bit with the relative intensity of things. You think you're getting a drop a lot earlier because it's kind of uncertain about how things are going to develop, and then when you consider the track as Anxiety Dance Floor, it makes a whole lot of sense. You know, you got a bit of anxiety about how things are going to envelop. But I think at 2 minutes 57 there's absolutely no filler within this. There's those kind of more sort of traditional kind of like kind of techie kind of elements there with the kicks and snares, etc., which are well produced. I like the way that the drums are presented with a mixture of interesting on-beat and syncopated elements there. We've got a like a halftime feel the entirety of the piece there, which kind of makes it a bit more kind of like chill, even though there's like a hell of a push to some of the percussion. It's kind of very kind of like perky sounding. There's some fun sort of like portamento synths there with a bit of kind of push there and the minor leaning there, which is great, a bit of buzz, as well as some fun sort of riser synths there that kind of flutter in the ether and a nice sort of synth effects element. When we have our upper like voice there, or like our kind of like verse sections there, you do have some really kind of like effective sort of trance kind of pads there, or some sequences in the background there to let you know, hey, this is another sort of flavor of the electronic music that we're trying to present. And we do have like further flourishes with like crashes and sort of phasers and like sort of bass lines and stuff like that as we go through it, but we don't really commit to the heaviness until that late stage. We have other fun sort of bass sounds and sort of like whooshy elements there, and occasional sort of percussive stabs and stuff like that, and lots of fun tippy-tappy elements going left and right here in that midsection there as well to kind of let you know we are building up for something. But there's just a few fake outs there. And what I kind of dig is that I think it could have been cool to have gone a hell of a lot heavier in that drop section than we did. You could have really kind of made it, again, floor to floor heavy, but it's almost like we're still kind of trying to tie that track back to the rest. And I think it's really meant to be its own consistent, kind of connected experience. It's just another angle of what we had before there, but just a pause before we say fuck it, you know, I think it's cool as well there, that final dip before we that kind of pause before we fully commit to it, to a different life. I think that some of the flutters, the really quick arpeggios and sequences there are nice sort of early 2010, just kind of EDM-ish, kind of like callback there. There's almost some sort of dubsteppy kind of stuff going on, which is kind of neat. But effectively, you know, it's very busy. And it's trying to incorporate maybe a lot of different styles that Howard likes, some sort of dubstepish stuff, some house kind of stuff, some sort of like techie bits. But regardless, it's their interpretation of electronic dance track, and I appreciate it, you know. And again, it being so busy with the Anxiety Dance Floor motif makes total sense. It's a connected concept that doesn't overstay its welcome, and I think that it ends out the track in a kind of a bittersweet way that I think is kind of clever. Thematically, you know, minor leaning there, it's more like this is my life kind of situation, a kind of bit of edginess there to kind of make things sound less cheesy. I think it might have sounded a bit cheesy if we tried to major lane this. It's just kind of accepting that this is our life now, and that, you know, a little bit of is suffering, but that, you know, like we're still going to try and do things anyways and break it down. I think the occasional tension in some of those chords is simply just to allow things to release and be pleasant even in the minor key. yeah, studio production, recording, mixing, and mastering is wonderful. I like the clarity of the various instruments within the mix. I like the playing around with the low end to really kind of allow things to kind of expand in that drop section, but not before then. We have a lot of fun sort of process, stylized synths, textures, pad sequences, rises, etc. there that are presented in different fashions, as well as fun tippy-tappy percussion bits going between the sides of the stereo field. No weird resonances in the frequency spectrum. If anything's filtered, it's deliberate. There is dynamic range. There's moments of quietness which are effective. Vocals aren't overproduced in it. They're done in a similar way to the rest of the album, which is nice, and it helps to sort of further connect it. Nice and loud, definite side chaining there. Bus compression limiting is handled. And ultimately, that is my review of this track. And now we're going to talk about the album as a whole in the conclusion. Because welcome to the conclusion of my review of this album from an actor named Howard Lewis, titled How to Read a Room. In this section, I'm going to provide an overall album analysis of everything from lyrics and vocals all the way through to studio production, as well as any applicable constructive critique, and then finally my general thoughts from a listener's perspective. But first of all, what do we think this album is about? I think this album is about someone who has gone through some trials and tribulations. Initially, the show, the opening night, is inviting the person that they're discussing things with directly. They had a sense of loss with them. Things have been terrible and toxic and not great with them. That they've either left or like he struggled without them at the very least. You know, he's been wound down and sort of having breakdowns and not been coping with life and how it's been treating him. You just get the feeling that this person's not had a positive impact on them as they leave and find someone else. But as you go through this piece, you kind of, you realize that, Howard is becoming aware of how they've lost their sense of agency, how they've become codependent on this other person. And eventually they're letting the person off the train at their next stop. And they're just trying to pick themselves off after letting go of this person. Eventually they do want to sort of go out there. And in the last track, they realize, oh wait, no, I'm not sure what to do with this. And they eventually kind of just realize, no, I just have to do it. It's just got to be done. And then they do so. And that's the album in a nutshell. Now, I've spoken about each of these tracks within their own sort of mini individual sort of like conclusions at the end of each track. So I'm not going to provide specificity on like per track elements here, insofar as it's more about my thoughts on the album as a whole. So if you want to check out specific tracks, I've got like chapterized arts going on and then the YouTube sort of upload specifically. But also just, Howard's vocals, if we focus on that for now, are tremendous throughout. I loved the immense sort of range that he has with his voice, from his highs, mids, and lows. He's got this wonderful sort of like body and texture and sort of like tone to his lower parts there, especially in tracks like Floor there. His harmonies are fantastic. They're very resonant in that range. But that's also in part due to the production we'll talk about near the end. But just like we've got like various ways that we express ourselves. We're comfortable with the legato and vibratos and adjusting our tails and having our melodies sound huge around the sides there. We kind of go into head voice or mixed voice or falsetto very occasionally, but we have different voicings per part of the track as well there, and we know how to be present both to do double tracking, for example, in songs like Anxiety Dance Floor. We know how to be alone with the guitar, and we know how to be present and amongst all the different elements that go on in tracks that are a lot busier than that. And effectively, it's just a really well-rounded performance on the microphone as well. Absolutely no moments where I'm questioning the decisions that we're making there. We're experienced on the mic. We understand what we're doing there, and I think it's just fantastic storytelling. And I think most importantly, especially with the stuff that we discussed, Howard is just being incredibly authentic, genuine, and expressive in the way that they approach things and express themselves. And I love that. I think that in a track like, or an album, should I say, like this, if you just talk about these things and you are not believable, it's a waste of time. And so I'm really thankful that Howard was able to sort of approach both the actual implementation of their vocal technique and sort of words and lyricism and storytelling in a way which was also incredibly easy to listen to, despite how heavy some things got. There's a delicate balance that it needs to be sort of approached there, and they handled it in spades. It was absolutely wonderful. With all the various genres that we had as well, there were some spoken parts, again, like with Anxiety Dance Floor and other parts where it's just, there were some questions asked that were really compelling, and ultimately, the vocals were incredibly well done. So with the vocals and the lyrics making sense with each other, you effectively just have the structure of these tracks, which at like 2 minutes with opening night to something 4.5 minutes, there was never any filler. You had a plethora of different instruments within these tracks that typically featured verses and sort of like choruses and interludes, some middle eights occasionally. There was a saxophone solo one part song that also had a guitar, sort of like lead licky part at the start there, so we had additional lead elements outside of Howard's vocals. We had sort of some drop sections as well as some builds and stuff, and Anxiety Dance Floor. We had each track being slightly different, and like had other parts that had like different chord progressions as well, just to kind of like further illustrate a different mood, like the floor, if I'm not mistaken. We broke the fourth wall occasionally with like the band that we had and bright lights going from left to right there, as well as go to the left, etc., with the whole entire sort of like interlude there as well. And it's just really wonderful. It's wonderful in part because you have a musician who clearly cares about the listener's experience as well. There are no sort of awkward transfers. I mean, like, aside from, again, track number 9, we were playing with tension a little bit, but it's just great. Really, really good. So effectively, if I talk about a few of the main sort of instrumental components, bearing in mind we had a variety of different synth pads, sequences, risers, synth textures there, basses, etc. We didn't just have synth elements though. For the vast majority of the album, it was fundamentally a mixture of different guitar, bass, drum, strings and key elements there, as well as, again, saxophone solo, which was wonderfully articulate in the way that it approached sort of our articulations. It's sort of like it's moving around its sort of range there with a throatness and expression that I feel mirrored the emotional nuance required for the piece. The guitars were playing a variety of sort of like, there's different tones for it, to be fair. 50% was heavily distorted and heavy. If it was sort of steel strings, you had sort of strummed or sort of picked elements there, sort of like mini sort of solo elements there, or some sort of like styled elements there that were sort of more sort of focused and acoustically. But we could also be more sort of balladesque when we needed to with the open and bar chords. With the flamenco styling guitars, such as an Opening Night there, we're busy with like kind of like little hammer-on and pull-off, kind of like glissando elements there as well. And we kind of found a little part to sort of add those little call and responses in, because call and responses were a big thing in this album. There are a lot of kind of vocal within this thing does a thing, etc. We knew how to both flesh those sort of nylon elements together with other elements as well as separate to themselves there. And it was very well fleshed out, and they found presence within the free spectrum as well as a composition to do that in a way that explored majors and minors, melodic and harmonic minors, etc., as well as Phrygians occasionally in other parts. There are also sort of like rotary guitars or other sort of like kind of curious effects layers that we had on them, which were ones I'm not necessarily familiar with, but I kind of enjoy. I also really did dig the kind of sauciness and spiciness of some of those sort of like kind of bluesier countries, kind of like lead tones that we had, some of those sort of like electric guitar layers, as well as the spiciness of the distorted rhythm guitars that we had within 50%, the power chord elements that played there, as well as some sort of unconventional chords for a bit of tension and drama. I like those as well. We had a variety of different guitar tones and lead and rhythm elements there that just fleshed it out so neatly. We were very comfortable with our open chords and our sort of like non-palm muted parts, but we also had a tightness with the chugs as well as a consistency or reliability with the eighth note grooves in certain tracks that allowed things to be a bit more sort of like somber and low-key when they needed to be. And we typically always had room for Howard when we needed to. The bass lines were typically very sort of well behaved in terms of the chord progressions and drum parts, and typically played along nicely with them, even though there was a song where it had like triplets and the bass was a bit more active in that one, which was kind of neat. Ultimately the bass was very supportive. The drums, there are a wide variety of different drum tones, different kits, etc., different snare sounds. Some tracks had claps, some had sort of rim shots there for a more sort of like, again, low key tone to those. Other parts had like big sort of bombastic snare and sort of tom fills. There was some interesting sort of finessey parts there with the hi-hats, some interesting 30-second elements, as well as some open hi-hats for a bit of offbeat accent. But some tracks as well, like Floor, had very minimalist sort of like cymbal layers and were typically sort of like kick and snare oriented there in a way, which was not sort of overplaying it at all. It was just kind of neat to have things a little bit more unsteady in those parts, as well as Opening Night, which was more sort of like traditionally snare drum oriented, as well as some sort of shakers and other bits of alternate percussion and parts there. And also the drum layers within Anxiety Dance Floor with the kind of sampled kicks and kits and cymbals, as well as that little tick-tocky layers going backwards and forwards as a tie back. I think the previous tracks as well was neat. There are also some synthetic elements in like kind of rock and harder grungy tracks like 50%, which was kind of neat as well, the way they kind of went side by side. And there's so much more than this, but I'm not really doing it justice. I recommend listening through this album yourself if you want to get more of it. But the strings as well, generally very sort of like tender, either by themselves or the cello in the lower range, or like you had the string section nice and full of vivacious dancing around the mid to uppers and other parts as well. Just beautiful sounding, and they were very sort of like aware and astute and sort of like compatible with a lot of the elements they were presented with, either sort of like filled a space, or they, you know, backed up a lot of the sort of like stuff that was going on with those guitars, or the key elements there. I mean, the piano when we had it was delicate. It was presenting arpeggios and triads or chord progressions or patterns, but it also, there was some glissando passages occasionally there. They did go a little bit outside of the wheelhouse, sort of expand occasionally as well. The organs as well, it had a sort of like nice spiritual kind of warm mid-range kind of approach there, where like they were looking for help, and it just was a nice sort of mid-range foil to kind of extend things further. And I think that's basically it. There was probably so much more than that, sort of other fun air candies and flourishes and rises and other elements there, cymbal shimmers, etc. It's just what I've got at this point. But just there's so much to appreciate, and nothing ever felt alien or out of place. You know, great sort of finesse, you know, comfortable with their sort of half-time and normal time passages there. The music was wonderful to listen to, and it was just so varied. I just don't think there's ever a moment, and in terms of the themes, they were typically very sort of like respectful of the genres or styles of music they were trying to sort of replicate or implicate. And there was never a moment where I felt like the chord progressions or the bass lines didn't make sense with the subject matter lyrically. There were some wonderful sort of major and minor passages, as well as some melodic and harmonic minors. There were some occasional kind of funky extensions. There were some like chromaticisms, I think, and like 50% where things got a bit wacky or sort of like were kind of breaking down. But other parts were a lot more sort of like straightforward and diatonic, I think, because they were trying to be a bit less kind of risque and more of a sort of a safe space. Typically though, very well handled. Nothing felt alien or sort of like unwarranted there. Lots of different chord progressions and bass lines, well fleshed out and well sort of like textured. Studio recording, mixing and mastering wise, commercial grade in my view. I love the tone of the brass. There was some wonderful brass elements as well, like such as in Opening Night there, and in other songs as well, like Bright Lights. There's a great callback to that there. Just the way they kind of peppered the mid to high range there, had a wonderful kind of buzz and sort of charm to those there. Wonderful articulation and sort of pseudo lead element there. Great alongside, you know, the trumpets alongside the saxophone that it had in other pieces there. It's just the more you kind of got to listen through these tracks multiple times to really sort of like remember everything. There's just so much to appreciate. But the brass, the strings, the pianos, the keys, the synths, the bass, guitar, drums, etc., all these different elements that were included were typically well measured within the frequency spectrum without any weird resonant frequencies or the stereo field. To be fair, if there were like bits of tension, like the kind of filthy sounding synth we had within like 50% kind of verse section, it was a deliberate thing. Or like there was like a heavier section where there was a kind of a fizzy synth there, and it was kind of a bit of menace and malice there, which was necessarily considering the subject matter. Music's around you in your headphones. I think, you know, the vocal harmonies were massive when they needed to be, or went further and extended, kind of like it came in on themselves. Things went backwards and forwards with panning, automation, as well as sort of volume automation in certain parts there. Great use of rises and sort of like just the vocals went overproduced, great use of EQ and compression and reverb, and there was dynamic range to it from both the production and composition perspective. It was nice and loud, bit of pumping occasionally, but it was also nice and quiet in other parts there. Had lots of life to it. Bus compression limiting was handled though. In terms of a general applicable constructive critique, I got none. I think it was a great isolated concept. I think again, having it finish on a note where you just kind of accept life as it is after the struggle you've gone through is a very human experience. From a general listener's perspective, it's been great to listen to Howard's journey throughout the last few sessions I've recorded. It's been a while since I've listened to his music, but I'm glad that I got to hear more. I think he's a wonderfully talented and creative musician who's clearly very competent on a microphone, and I've enjoyed listening through the story here, even though I do feel for him at times with the struggle that he's gone through. Codependency is not a fun time. Toxic relationships are not a fun time. I wish everyone involved the best of luck in the future with the musical and non-musical endeavors. But thank you for watching my review of this album from an actor named Howard Lewis, titled How to Read a Room. Hopefully you enjoyed it. If you did, please do go show them some love via their various social medias. I'm sure they'll be on digital streaming platforms, including their Bandcamp page. And stay cool and stay safe. And please remember to support your local musicians and artists at this point in time, as they need the help more than ever with all the crazy stuff going on in the world. And I'll catch you in the next SB Reacts. Spiderhands out.